For children with disabilities, inclusion in societal life is often the gateway to independence. To make this journey a little bit smoother along the way, a common ally which often accompanies these children and their families is the use of a mobility device such as a walker or a wheelchair. Securing the usage of these mobility devices can often be an extended and exhaustive process. With that in mind, in this episode of the Speak Up podcast, we'll take a deeper dive and a closer look into the securing process itself and the funding options that may be available for families to access and navigate as they work through this process at large. We'll also take a look at innovations in the field and how families can use their mobility device for their children as their first sign of true independence. Tracy Roberts is a occupational therapist for the John McGivney Children's Center who works in their seating department, and she joined me this week to discuss all things relating to seating and mobility. My conversation with the Roberts starts right now. With that, Tracy, then I'll welcome you to the program, and I want to thank you for being a part of the Speak Up podcast, and I'm excited to talk to you this morning all about seating and mobility. Great to see you this morning, and thank you for a few minutes.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, Tracy, I'm wondering if we could start our conversation by you outlining for me why a child would be referred to the seating department in the first place in terms of why they would need a mobility device or why they would be referred to the department in general.
So usually children are referred to seating when a family or the therapy team in conjunction with the family feel that the child's mobility or posture could be improved by using a mobility device. Sometimes, a lot of times it's when little ones are getting a little bit too big to be carried by their parents, or their infant strollers becoming a bit too small for them, but they still need some sort of wheeled mobility to get them around. And then sometimes it's just if the child's just having a bit too much difficulty sitting in just their basic stroller or high chair, and they might need a little bit more support. So those are typically, for our little ones, those are typically the reasons why they'll have their first referral to seating mobility. That, or for our older kids, it's when they start thinking about when they're going to be entering junior kindergarten and thinking about how they're going to be getting around school or getting to school for when they do start in elementary school.
Yeah, absolutely. Tracy, tell me, what do you think you've heard most often from families when it comes to the referral process in general, when they're referred by a member of their therapy team, or if families bring up suggestions when it comes to seating and mobility? So what are you hearing most from families as they go through this process?
Sometimes families are really excited about giving their child more opportunities to move around using their wheelchair, or because it's going to increase their independence with moving around. But sometimes it's very scary for families. Sometimes they're a little bit upset when their primary therapists start talking about putting a referral into seating. Just because often families' priorities are for their child to walk, and then to talk about potentially getting a wheelchair for their child, sometimes they feel like that might be a bit of a step back and taking away from their goal of walking. So a lot of times families will come just saying they just want a bigger stroller for their child and something that doesn't look like a wheelchair. So it opens a big can of worms with regard to why we want to just add and expand a child's mobility. We don't want to take away. It doesn't mean by getting a wheelchair that we're going to shelve the goal of walking. It just gives them one more opportunity to move independently. So sometimes that's a little hard for families to hear for the first time. So it can be a little scary sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tracy, tell me, once a family has been referred to the Seating and Mobility Department, what is the thing is the a common thing that they can expect once they've been referred to the department at large?
Um, but probably what they'll expect initially really is probably silence for the first little bit. So there's usually a waiting time for, if it's just a standard referral and it's not an emergency. Clients can often wait 3 to 6 months before one of our seating therapists picks up that referral and calls the family for an appointment. So, and sometimes they'll think that we've forgotten about them. We haven't, for sure. They're on our waiting list. And then when we do call with to arrange that first appointment, that we'll see them within a week or two after we call them, once they come off the waiting list. But if anything happens, like if that regular referral suddenly becomes a little bit more urgent for the family, they can always ask their OT or PT if it's possible to be seen quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. So after the initial assessment, Tracy, tell me about bringing home a mobility device. How long does that process usually take?
Well, that varies too. Um, if everything goes perfectly and all funding is in place and it hasn't been it's not a very complicated piece of equipment, it should take about 3 months from that time of the initial assessment to bringing home the mobility device. But often we need to piece together funding. So if we need to find extra funding, that time can increase drastically, depending on how much funding we need to piece together, or if the piece of equipment is quite complicated. So then that can expand that wait time from initial assessment. It could be 6 to 8 months before they get get to take their piece of equipment home.
Yeah, and I'm curious also, Tracy, to ask you what sort of considerations go into prescribing a mobility device? Because as you mentioned before, families may be looking for different solutions, but there may be some external factors that they need to consider along with the seating department and the therapist. So tell me about the considerations that go into prescribing a mobility device.
So as therapists, so in seating, our top priority is making sure that the children sit well in their mobility device and are as independent as possible when they are sitting in their device. So we want our kids to sit with a good posture and be able to use their hands and arms to be able to do things like propel themselves or feed themselves or do their schoolwork. But then, so that's our priority as therapists. But then we need to also take in the family's priorities, the therapy goals as well. So, when the family, we need to think about their accessibility, their home. Like how are they going to get that device into their home? How are they going to get that device into their vehicle and transport it to wherever they're going? So we need to consider a whole lot of accessibility factors as well. and then from the therapy and therapy, their primary therapists are going to want, how are they going to transfer in and out of it? Or we need to make sure that there's enough space for that child to be able to potentially transfer in and out of that wheelchair or a stroller independently. We have to, and then the other thing, which is a trickier part, is funding as well. So the Ontario government has a very good funding program, but they like equipment to last at least 5 years. So we have to think not just about that child's today and what's happening today. We have to look into our crystal ball a little bit and think for the next 5 years, what's this child's life going to do? What are they going to be starting school? Like, do we want to put them in just a simple stroller if they're going to be at school, where we don't want children being pushed around in a stroller by their friends, that we want them to be able to play and interact with their friends, not be dependent on their friends for mobility. So we have to really think about what the next 5 years are going to look like, and what changes in that child's life are going to happen for the next 5 years. And then, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's an evolving picture, isn't it? It changes as a child gets older, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. So, and not only do their what they're going to be doing in their life change, but their body size is going to change. And even they're working on a whole lot of therapy as well, and their function can change as well. And what's nice about the government program is good about if children, if their body size changes or their functional status changes, the government is good about being a little bit flexible on that 5 years. But we really want to make sure that we're making the most of the next 5 years and kind of looking at a much bigger picture than just today.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Tracy, let's talk about money and the funding options that may be available to families, because depending on the need and the mobility device, there are different pockets of funding that are available, isn't there?
Right. Yeah. So, as I said, so the Ontario government, through the Ministry of Health, has a program called the Assistive Devices Program. So that program will fund up to 75% toward the cost of specific mobility devices, and then if a child or family receive other government subsidies, like assistance for children with severe disabilities, or if they're over 18, if they receive the government subsidy called Ontario Disability Support Program, then 100% of the cost is covered through ADP, so the Assisted Devices Program. So in the Seating and Mobility Clinic, we're certified with the government program to be Assisted Devices Program authorizers. So our responsibility as ADP authorizers is to determine if that client we're assessing qualifies for funding through ADP, and just making sure that child's basic mobility needs are going to be met. For those families that don't receive any other government subsidies, and if we need to look at that other 25% that isn't covered through ADP, often families, if mom or dad have extended health benefits through their work, that is often a good source of funding for that client portion, or that 25%. And then other charities as well, such as Easter Seals or Muscular Dystrophy Canada, Ontario Federation for Cerebral Palsy, or Rotary Club, are also very good about helping cover that client portion for the equipment. But all of those, piecing together all of those applications, it takes time, and that's kind of what ends up kind of stretching out that that time it takes for you to get your equipment and to be able to take it home. But we will also we help with filling in all of the required paperwork and getting quotes and whatnot for families, so that they don't have to do a ton of legwork. It's more just having patience and waiting to piece together the funding.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tricia, tell me, once a family has selected a mobility device, what sort of process can they go through when it comes to getting special features or a color that they may want on their mobility device? Can we walk through that process this morning?
Sure. Yeah, all of the wheelchair manufacturers, and or they all have their standard selection of colors, and each one is a little bit different. So we have color charts for each device that we're thinking about, and families can look at those color charts to pick a color for their device. If a child is desperately wants a specific color, and it's offered only by a certain manufacturer, then there's enough flexibility in the wheelchairs that we can probably make sure that we stick with a particular vendor, a particular manufacturer of a wheelchair, if somebody is has their heart set on a very specific color. There's also fun things like some of the spoke guards on manual wheelchairs that have the larger rear wheels. You can get different patterns or a solid black color on spoke guards. So yeah, you can make your manual wheelchairs. The frames look pretty neat, when we're picking out all the different features. And then with power chairs, there's some pretty amazing technology, which unfortunately isn't all funded by the government. So some of the options in power wheelchairs that are funded by the government program are power tilt and power recline and power elevating leg rest. So all these features allow somebody in a power chair to be able to adjust their position throughout the day, which is really, really nice and great for circulation and skin and everything else. They're great features to have. That makes the wheelchair a very, very expensive piece of equipment. But they are options there that are funded through the government. Some other options in power wheelchairs that unfortunately the government doesn't cover, but are wonderful for function. So seat elevators on a power wheelchair, which allows the client to raise their seat height up by about 12 inches, which allows them to access their counters and sinks easier. That's a wonderful option, but is not covered by the government, unfortunately. That upgrade is around $3,000. And then another even more expensive upgrade is a power standing option, which allows the client to go from sitting in their power chair, and the power chair brings them up into a standing position, which can be a $10,000 to $15,000 upgrade. But it's also a really, really cool option if we can get funding for it.
Well, I tell you, the advancement of power chairs has come a long way, hasn't it?
It sure has. It's amazing, and even with all of the Bluetooth access now has been wonderful through with power chairs as well. With especially now that the world, like, connectivity and smart homes and everything is becoming so much more mainstream now. So you can do a whole lot more with from your power chair now by just being able to connect to your Google Home. It's really neat.
Absolutely. And Treasure, we talked about steps that families can take earlier while they're waiting for their assessment to happen, like contacting Easter Seals just to get some more information, for example. But I'm curious, do you advise families to do anything else in terms of preparation or anything they can do while they're waiting for their initial assessments?
Yeah, for sure. I would say make sure they have a lot of communication with their primary OTs and PTs. We rely really heavily on information from the occupational therapists and physiotherapists and therapists and social workers as well, who know that child. They're that child's primary team, so they can paint a much more colorful picture than we can gather in one seating assessment. So have lots of conversations with your primary team. Make sure as well, and the whole funding part is very, very, very confusing. And you can tap into your primary therapists and your social worker to make sure that you're registered. Sometimes even with Easter seals, it gets confusing because families think they're registered with Easter seals because they're receiving a diaper grant through Easter seals, which is a different branch than the equipment one. So you need to make sure that you're registered for with Easter seals for that equipment end of things, or MD Canada, OFCP. Talk to your primary therapists just to make sure you're registered with everybody that you possibly could be registered with, so that we can tap into those resources more quickly, rather than starting that process um, when you start your seating assessment. And then the other part that kind of creates a little confusion for families that have never had any devices before is on that the day of that assessment, we'll ask them what vendor or store they like to order their equipment from. And if they've never ordered any equipment before, they don't know. So if you can talk with other families of kids who have special needs, and if they've already used various stores, you can kind of gather some information there and see what you're thinking, or even just being aware of what stores are out there. We can give that information out, and you can again talk to your primary therapists about that. Just because lots of times we'll get a family comes in for that initial assessment, and we say, what store would you like to use? And it's like, oh, you just pick. We can kind of talk about the different stores and the good and the bad with all of the different stores, but we can't pick for you. So just knowing who's out there and where you could potentially get your equipment would also be helpful coming into the seating assessment.
Yeah, absolutely. And you also mentioned earlier about the importance of long term planning when you're making seating recommendations for kids and families. But I'm also curious to ask you, how much of a responsibility do you think it is on the family's part to also consider how their kids are going to live in social settings, whether they go to school or whether they want the mobility device to help them better go to recreational opportunities? So how important, building on your last answer, is for families to do their homework when requesting a specific mobility devices?
Absolutely. They need to know, kind of, again, looking in that 5-year crystal ball, what's going to work for them. Because lots of times, like there's no point in us recommending a piece of equipment that's just going to get parked in a corner and not used. It's a waste of their time and money that could potentially be used could have been used for something different. And we prefer families to be quite open and honest with us. If I'm suggesting something and a family tells me that's not going to work for me, I so respect that, and I would rather hear that from a family so that we can kind of just go back to the drawing board and figure out what's going to work for them, rather than them just say, fine, we'll just take it and then not use it. So yeah, they need to think about what do they want their child to be doing? Where do they want to go? Are they planning, where, even how are they going to be getting to school? How are, what activities does their child like to do? What would they like their child to be in? And how will they be using that device? Will they be using the device when they're participating in all those activities? So yeah, really, again, we want to really keep going back to painting a really good picture. We just see that seating assessment. We meet them for an hour or so. So coming in and with as much information as possible, and we may not make a decision right then and there on that very first assessment of what specific equipment, but we can at least kind of just get a feel for what might be a good match, because we need to make families really aware that wheelchairs can be heavy, difficult to fold, impossible to fold sometimes, and they need to know if that's going to even work in their home and vehicle, or even how they're going to get it in their home and vehicle. And in our seating therapists, as well as their child's OT, can help them look at options to make their environment more accessible, if that's something that is a goal for the family.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tracy, tell me, what happens if a child grows out of their seating and mobility device? What's the process then?
So if a child looks like they're getting a bit too big for their device, families can call our seating clinic directly, or the families can ask their OT or PT to put a referral in for adjustments. You don't end up we call it just a quick screening referral sometimes. So it doesn't mean if it's something that's going to be a quick adjustments, then you won't end up sitting on the waiting list for 3 to 6 months. We can probably see a child within that first month or so, just to do some quick adjustments and see if there is enough growth available in the equipment they have right now, to make it fit a little bit better. And then if new equipment's required, the government funding program is pretty good about replacing equipment prior to that required 5 years, if they have grown out of the equipment completely. But we usually build a lot of growth when we're ordering the wheelchairs and strollers. There's a lot of adjustment available, so that we can usually squeak out close to 5 years by just doing adjustments, but they certainly don't have to wait on a wait list for a long period of time. They can.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tracy, can you tell me, if a mobility device gets damaged or something happens to it? I'm thinking if a family takes a mobility device on an airplane, for example, or if it gets damaged in the regular sort of course of life. I'm wondering, are there warranties or different sorts of funding that may be available to help with that repair?
Kind of, yes. So usually the equipment, ADP requires equipment to be warranted for 2 years for manufacturer defects. So if something is going wrong with the wheelchair, that seems like it's not just wear and tear, then the repair or replacement of those parts will be fully covered by the manufacturer for those 2 years. But yeah, things happen for sure, that aren't just manufacturer defects. It's wear and tear, or cargo hoists onto a plane, dropping a wheelchair. That happens for sure. So if it's something like that, where we have had a few families whose wheelchairs have been catastrophically damaged while being lifted in or out of a wheelchair. Then there are it's usually the airline insurance programs will pay to replace the wheelchair. But again, it takes time. Usually, even if I ordered something today, it's still going to probably be a good 8 weeks before equipment comes in. So if it's wear and tear, families they would need to call that vendor or store where the wheelchair was ordered from. If they receive the government subsidies like ACSD or ODSP, that they will cover the costs of those repairs. And then if a family has if the family has the extended health benefits and that wheelchair, if that insurance provider has contributed to the purchase of that wheelchair, often the extended health benefits will cover repairs as well. So it's certainly worth submitting those receipts just to see if extended health benefits will cover it. Otherwise, from a funding perspective, you might be able to get Rotary to cover it, but typically lots of the charities like Easter Seals and MD Canada, they don't want the equipment or the repair to be done until the funding is approved, which means that they could be stuck without their broken mobility. If their mobility device is broken and not usable, you want to get it repaired right away, not have to wait for funding. So sometimes that ends up being an out-of-pocket expense if they don't have any other government subsidies, unfortunately.
And Tricia, can you tell me about the other services that families need to know about that the city department offers that we haven't covered yet this morning?
Sometimes when we have really little babies, or even toddlers, we can look at them in their high chairs and car seats. If families aren't quite at the point of needing a mobility device yet, because their baby's still a baby, and if they're all still being carried around in their car seat, we can look at them in the other things that that baby sits in, to see if we need to add in a few little simple supports, just to make them sit better in what they're using right now. And then we also look at bed positioning in collaboration with the child's primary OT and PT. We like to talk about 24-hour postural care. So just making sure that even when kids are not in their mobility device, that when they're in bed or on the floor, that we're looking at their posture then too, just to make sure that they're being still in a position that's not going to cause any damage to their body orthopedically when they're not in their wheelchair. And then so in our seating clinic itself, we are also a registered vendor with ADP for seating only. So we make custom trays, custom headrests, leg and foot positioners, and different, if we need extra padding in different places and whatnot. So we make all of that, those pieces custom in our seating department too.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tricia, out of curiosity, I'm curious to get your thoughts on the innovation you've seen in the seating and mobility space, and where do you think the industry is going within the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I mean, I was talking about earlier about even when kids are in power chairs with the Bluetooth access. I think it being able to access Bluetooth devices through the joystick on their power chair is just getting better and better and better every year. The technology and ability to access things improves. It's hard to keep up with it. And then some of the manufacturers for cushions and backrests are moving into doing some 3D printing, which is really cool. I think that's probably where things are are heading next. And even just last week, I went on a training course for some brain computer interface stuff, which was really neat, where it's almost using just without actually moving. You just kind of use the electrical impulses in your brain to control different objects. Right now, they're just kind of working on controlling a toy, but I can see that in the future moving into being able to move your wheelchair potentially as that technology improves too.
And that's really cool, isn't it?
It is.
Absolutely. Tracy, tell me, what sort of pride do you personally and the department as a whole take in helping kids really for the first time create their own sense of independence? Tell me about the pride that you and the department take in the work that you do.
There is nothing better than watching a child get in a wheelchair and just instantly start moving it with no training at all. They put their hands on their wheels or they put their hands on the joystick, and you can see that light bulb just instantly go on, and like their whole face lights up because they know instantaneously that they just did that by themselves. And sometimes that's the first time that they've really been able to move themselves without anybody helping them. And it's just that it's so cool to be able to give them the tools to help them explore their environment by themselves. And I love being, even I was at a school, so I was trying a power wheelchair with a boy who was quite reluctant to go into a power wheelchair from his manual wheelchair. So we just put a trial one in for him, and it was just watching him fidget was cool. Like just something that when it's your own kids and they're being restless and moving around, and it can be an annoyance when it's your own kid because that's what they are doing it all the time. But when it's their first time, they finally have control of saying, I want to go, can we go? And he's just like, are we ready now? Are we ready now? And it was so neat for him to just be able to fidget and pester and be in control of his own environment finally, and not be completely dependent on somebody else to move him from point A to point B, and to be able to do it himself. It was incredible. It gives me goosebumps every time. So much fun.
Yeah, it's important work that you do in the student department. And Tracy, I'm also wondering your thoughts on how important it is for kids to really embrace their mobility devices, a source or an ally towards their independence, and really understanding how the mobility device can really change their lives. What are your thoughts there?
I think I think kids quite quickly understand that how how a mobility device can enhance their independence. I think sometimes it's the size of it, which can, especially when kids are entering their teens, where they want to kind of just blend with the crowd. They don't want to stand out. They want to just kind of go with the flow. And to have a big bulky wheelchair is sometimes something that they are reluctant to have. So it's kind of finding that balance and trying to, especially if someone's moving into a power wheelchair, which is a big, heavy wheelchair. Sometimes we're lucky enough to have a pretty good pool of wheelchairs that have been donated back to us. So sometimes when kids and families are reluctant to try something different or even try a mobility device at all, we'll often see if we have something available, a piece of loaner equipment that we can have for them to use and try for an extended period of time. I think that sometimes helps. And it's similar to that boy I was talking about where he was reluctant to move from manual to power. And just having that opportunity to be able to use that power wheelchair at school and to see how many doors that has opened for him. has certainly brought him on board with seeing that it is a good it will be a good choice to make, and that it certainly will enhance their independence. So whenever possible, if it's possible for us to put some trial equipment in place, to see if it works for the family, the child, or and even their whole lifestyle, certainly helps kind of narrow down what everybody, and figure out exactly whatever is going to work for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And Tracy, I'm curious if I gave you a magic wand to make the seating and mobility process easier for families to navigate or understand, what part of the process do you wish that could sometimes be made a little bit more easier for families? What are your thoughts there?
I, Navigating the funding part, and shortening the time it takes to get equipment. That's how I'd use my magic wand or my my lottery winnings. Hopefully someday. Um, I would certainly. I'd like to get kids in their equipment faster, and there's just it gets overwhelming with, we can provide as much support as we can, but I think it gets overwhelming for families, for even just sign this piece of paper, sign this one, and it's hard sometimes for us to wrap our heads around, and I can't imagine how difficult it is for families to be going through this for the first time, or even if it's their third, fourth, or fifth time. It's always just too much, and it's very piecemeal, and not very efficient.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm also wondering your thoughts on the most common questions that you get from parents and walking them through that process. So, what are some of the most frequently asked questions you get from parents on a regular basis?
Um, I think the most frequent thing we hear is how heavy equipment is, and that it's bulky and cumbersome. Um, and I so I it's and it, which is kind of why a lot of families want to just have a simple stroller, because it's so much easier to just fold up and put in your trunk of your car. Where we get a lot. Is there anything that's lighter weight? Is there anything that's easier for us to get in and out of the vehicle, or in and out of the house? That's easier to collapse. But unfortunately, it's a win lose situation. So if we give a child something that is super easy, um, like a stroller, then they lose a whole lot of independence. And so it's kind of that balancing act. And I wish there was a magic answer out there saying, yep, there is a perfect piece of equipment that is going to be lightweight and easy to collapse and get in and out of your home. But unfortunately, that hasn't arrived yet.
Because things keep evolving, don't they?
Yes, they do someday.
Absolutely. Tracy, my final question for you is, I'm curious, from your perspective, what's the best part of your job?
Ooh. My favorite part of my job is, I love making people look good in sitting, and then and why I we do a lot of custom molded seating, for um, kids, and older kids that don't sit up quite so well, and to be able to get them in seating that gets them sitting up, so people are seeing, can look at them sitting upright, and look at people eye to eye, and be able to function better, breathe better, eat better, use your hands better. And I love going into schools, and seeing them. When I see them at the seating assessment, which is essentially that before picture, and then going into schools and seeing that there's carryover, and seeing that they're sitting well, and being able to do things and are happier. That is my absolute favorite part of my job.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said before, you and your colleagues do important work. I can tell you, Tracy, I just went through the process of getting my newest wheelchair, so I can relate to the process, and it can be extensive. And I want to thank you for the good work that you do to make it just a little bit easier on families, and for joining me to provide some much needed and helpful information on how the seating and mobility process works. Great to see you as always, and thank you for engaging in conversation. It's most appreciated.
It was my pleasure, and it was great to see you again, and thank you for having me.